Welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast, your bank of knowledge of investment, economics, and geopolitics. Go to goldnewsletter.com for our publications and archives.
This is the Gold Newsletter Podcast. Fergus Hodgson, your host, joined by BRIEN, London in New Orleans, Louisiana. We are honored today to have former Republican Congressman and presidential candidate Ron Paul. He is the current chairman of the Ron Paul Institute, host of the Ron Paul Liberty Report, and he works with Stansberry Research. Ron Paul, welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast.
Very good. Nice to be with you today.
Great. And we were just discussing before we got rolling that you have focused on economic issues, or many issues throughout your career, but you're particularly concerned about this low interest world, which we are often discussing. And why do you see essentially zero real interest rates as so problematic?
Yeah, it might even be minus if you find out what the real inflation rate is, because there's a lot of deception. A lot of deception goes on. You know, I first got involved in politics way back in the 70s when the Bretton Woods broke down, and then we had the first explosion of gold from $35 up to over $800. And that was a real big event for me. That's what drove me into politics. Not that I wanted to be in politics, but I wanted to talk about what was coming. And it certainly has happened. We've had the tremendous volatility in our markets. And that was a big event in 1971, but I think we're facing something very, very similar. We're on the edge of it, but when this finally bursts, I think it's going to have a climactic end, maybe having a greater effect than the closing of the Bretton Woods, because for some reason, the people around the world have been able to accept our militarism and our wealth and our fiat dollar as being something that we can all hang on to. But I think the evidence is getting very, very clear that they can't do it, and we can't continue to spend like we do, run up the deficits, and depend on the Fed to keep printing this money. There's one thing that really bothers me about this system, because in politics, and you hear it all the time in the presidential races, that, you know, if you lean libertarian or conservative, you hate the poor people and you love the rich people and this sort of thing. But some of the people on the left have it right. You know, I do think this system is very helpful to the insiders, those people who are part of the deep state and the people in the military-industrial complex. They like this. They have low interest rates. They keep going and going and going and making profits. At the same time, it's very punishing to the average person in the middle class, because their inflation rate, their price inflation, is much higher than the rich, and the rich don't even care. So what they do, they punish them, and if they try to save and be responsible, what do they get? 1%? Sometimes less, 1 or 2%. At the same time, you know, if they have to pay credit card debt or student debt, the rates are much, much higher. So it is a system that's designed to fail, but not only will it be a failure of the economic system, I think the social fabric of the country is very vulnerable, and I think that's why you hear so much conflict. And when you hear all that talk about impeachment, all these other things, I think it's a distraction from some of the real problems. And I've always seen the basic real problem is the monetary system being able to finance a government out of control. And when a government is out of control, that means our liberties are at great risk.
You just said that it was unsustainable. Is there a particular, when you say things have to change, I mean, I know you don't want to give a particular time frame, but what would be that end point? You know, what would be the change point where you say that we've actually turned a corner?
Well, there probably will be an event, something like what happened in 2008 when the system broke down and we had the crisis of 2008 and 2009. And we may have an event like that, or we may continue to do what we're doing. But eventually, I think there will be a panic, because every day you can find an article someplace. I read one this morning. Another country saying, we don't want to use the dollar. We'll use the euro, or we'll use the yen, or do something, anything but the dollar. The dollar is under attack. but it probably has hurt us more than is recognized. So there hasn't been a panic. Matter of fact, about the only panic there is those people who know what's happening and seeing all this money out there. And right now the consensus is, well, just buy more stocks, more mergers and all these things. But I don't know the time and place when the final conclusion comes, but I think we're all going to know it. But I think that it'd be pretty amazing if we get through next year's election without having a significant economic event, which could go either way, politically speaking.
Ron, I'd love to explore that a little bit more, but going back to a point you made just a minute or two ago, that you agreed with the progressive candidates in particular, who are saying right now that this system doesn't work for the average Joe. And it really doesn't. I mean, I completely agree with this. But what scares me is that they are now railing against capitalism and calling this, these are the ills of capitalism. And they're suggesting socialism as the antidote, or more socialism, more socialistic capitalism, if there is such a thing. But what they're really railing against is crony capitalism. And they talk about how free markets aren't working, but these are the furthest thing from free markets. And that's really scary to me, is that they're recoiling against the very idea of freer markets and more liberty.
I think you're touching on the most important thing, and it's words. And the word now is the problems that the progressives are complaining about, not a consequence of too much freedom. It's a consequence of too much government. And it is crony capitalism, it's interventionism, it's Keynesianism, it's deficits, it's central banking, and all these things have done that. So, but most Republicans don't want to do any criticizing and say, well, this is all bad, because then it looks like, oh, they're criticizing the president and this sort of thing. So they stay away from it. So they let this stand. That the problems we have, according to the left, are due to conservatives and free markets, and yet we should be complaining about what's going on now. And one of the lessons I learned a long time ago in reading Human Action, Mises's great book, was he points out that the middle class depends on sound money. If you have sound money and that will limit government. Then you have a healthier middle class. But when you destroy the money, you'll destroy the middle class. And I keep looking at that. And when I look at those pictures of people on the street, I tell you what, we're not anywhere close to having a free market capitalist system. We're at the end point of some experiment that's not working.
Getting back to that end point, and you were just mentioning the final collapse of the Bretton Woods system and the closing of the gold window in 1971, that launched you into politics. It also launched Gold Newsletter. That's the precise time that Jim Blanchard started Gold Newsletter. So we all kind of started back then. But after that, one of the things that I've talked about in Gold Newsletter and on these podcasts is at that point, the central banks could then print money and spend, and the government could spend with no repercussions or no immediate repercussions. And that following the experiment or the experience of the 1970s, central banks got a little more circumspect about it. But every economic downturn was met with easier money and a flood of liquidity with each successive cycle, until the point that we are here today. With each cycle, they need more money, easier, lower interest rates, to the point where now we're zero bound. We have negative rates. We have quantitative easing to degrees that we never would have thought of before or even considered before. And so each cycle demands more and more of this prescription. Are we at that end point now, or can we go another couple of cycles or even a few cycles before the world says, these fiat currencies, and the dollar in particular, have lost all credibility?
Well, nobody knows exactly, because it seems like, the psychology of some people is it's good times are going to roll, and confidence is the big factor, and that's subjective. But no, they can't be endless. They will end. I think we are fast approaching that. The whole thing is they don't have much effort they can do. They can't lower the rates of interest anymore, and they won't cut spending, but they will constantly claim that, and they could if they could do it if they really would desire to. But it's the role of government, so we will continue to do that. Now, I think what's going to happen is monetary policies are going to change, even though I think we have a type of modern monetary theory ongoing because it's so insane. But I think they're going to do a lot more of that. And you've seen hints from some of the Federal Reserve people, well, we need to get more help to the poor people. So I think it may be helicopter time, and they're going to figure out a way, just putting money into the stock market, encouraging, buybacks and joint ventures and all this kind of stuff. I mean, that's where the tremendous inflation has been. So, but I think they're going to find a way. They're never going to stop Social Security checks from going on. They'll never stop paying the medical care bills, but they can keep printing more money for that. But the big question, it's trying to understand the psychology of a lot of people. When will people panic and go somewhere else? And right now, the world hasn't offered much more. You can look at the dollar. The dollar isn't crashing according, with other currencies. Mm-hmm. Because there's not any real competition. So when they start the real process of helicopter money, I think you're going to see some old-fashioned price inflation, and people will then do the panic, and who knows how long the panic will last. Depends on the government officials, because the more they do, the longer it lasts.
The Gold Newsletter podcast is proudly sponsored by the Discovery Group of Exploration and Development Companies. To learn more about our exceptional track record and exciting future, visit discoverygroup.ca.
Hello and welcome back to our weekly interview with the Discovery Group, which is the proud sponsor of the Gold Newsletter podcast. Each episode, we interview one of the Discovery Group companies. I am Daniel Duarte, editor of this podcast, and today I have the pleasure of talking with Tom Martin, Director of Corporate Development at Ethos Gold. Ethos Gold is a resource exploration company led by a highly qualified management team with over 100 years of collective experience in mining and finance. This is from their website. Tom, thank you for joining us again.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me again.
It seems there's some news about the Ligneris gold project in Québec we discussed in our previous interview. Can you briefly remind our listeners what this is about?
Well, as of today, we made an announcement that we just closed a private placement of roughly 1.76 million Canadian dollars, which is earmarked for our project in Québec, Ligneris. I was fortunate enough to be on the property last week because we're currently drilling. We started drilling there at the beginning of November. I can tell you that we sent our first batch of core to be assayed while I was there. And so we're awaiting results, but we're very encouraged by what we're seeing. We did quite a lot of geophysics work earlier in the year, and proud to say that, and relieved to say that the mineralization, the type of rock that we're finding, very much fit the modeling that was discovered during our geophysics. So we've hit the type of rock, the sulfided rock, that we hoped we would at the depth we would. So far, a success, and everybody's very excited for hopefully some good results coming.
Well, that's certainly a relief, right?
Mm-hmm.
And on November 1, yes, you started the drilling.
Yes, we did.
At the project. So what are the objectives? What are you expecting to find?
Well, the property lies in the Abitibi-Val-d'Or corridor. Having been my first visit to the area, it's an incredibly vibrant and prolific and busy mining region. And the mineralization that is currently, being mined out of the ground, because there is lots of current mines in production in the area, very much follows a strong modeling. It's disseminated gold at certain depths. In some places it's deeper than others, but certainly the discoveries in the area over the last couple of years have been the significant ones are deeper regions. The world's deepest gold mine is actually in Val-d'Or, the Agnico Eagle property. So through geophysics, we were confident that our system matched model-wise some of the other prolific mines in the area. So we went with some confidence based on some of our magnetic testing, our IP testing that we did in the spring, to come up with an exploration program. and a drill program with some priority targets. And as I said, we're into started our 7th hole yesterday, and we hit the mineralization zones. We don't know what they are yet, but we're confident there's going to be mineralization there. We get assays, but we're certainly encouraged by our very experienced team. We've got people from the Québec region who are working with us, and some of them have obviously worked in projects that have gone into production. So they're quite excited and quite relieved by the core samples that we're getting so far.
What are the potential catalysts for even higher share prices that an investor can look forward to with Ethos Gold?
You know, the philosophy from our upper management, Craig Roberts, and our board is that we're a company that believes that share price is going to be based on results and not hype. So I hope and confident for all our shareholders that, you know, we get the results that we want in our properties. You know, currently Ligneris is our property that's in drilling. Our Nevada and our BC properties are going to need some more geophysic work before we start drilling, but that will happen in this next year. But I think the catalyst is going to be the results that come from our Québec property, our Ligneris property. And I'm confident that we will, that through due diligence and very calculated, planned exploration program, we hope to deliver those results for our shareholders. And that obviously would be good marketable news for the company, which hopefully will reflect in a strengthening of the price.
So we can expect news perhaps in the first semester of next year?
Yes, for sure. Yes, Daniel. We hope to have assay results back here in the next 4 to 6 weeks, and we'll be making announcements based on that for sure.
Well, that's great. We'll definitely be following that. And Tom, thank you so much for your time today and for updating us on Ethos Gold and its opportunities.
Thank you, Daniel. It's always a pleasure. It's nice to spread the word. Bye-bye.
Hello there, listeners. We have a special offer for you. Go to goldnewsletter.com/bonus to get Brian London's top 2 mining stock picks and his Golden Opportunities newsletter. That is goldnewsletter.com/bonus.
Isn't the dollar's relative strength, though, also a function of the fact that we're all in the same boat together, and these other currencies are it's competitive devaluations. They're all racing to the bottom of the hill together, and that some lead and some lag behind at some points in times, and other ones get to the head of the pack. But they're all going in the same direction because, for the first time, I guess, in human history, it is a global economy, and every developed economy has built up these tremendous debts that are at unmanageable levels.
Yeah, I think so. And that's out of necessity and practicality, but I think that will end because we have built up a lot of animosity because we throw our weight around. We use sanctions and trade barriers and all these things, and then we have a presence around the world that even though people claim we have to do it and they want us there. I mean, we're in 170 countries. And just look at the Middle East. I was just thinking today, we did on the report today, I mentioned the fact that, we brought up the subject of Iraq. Iraq is, drifting backwards. It's not much better off. It's just a total failure, the whole system of intervention, but we've made a lot of enemies. And people that we, just say, well, if you don't do that, we're going to put on sanctions, or we're going to put on barriers, and we're in these trade wars and things going on. And I think it's more amazing to try to explain why it lasts than what is going to happen. But I think it's an illusion, and it's trust. And as long as you trust the system, you'll just say, well, print more money. And Trump pushes it, but Trump also talks in some ways like a supply sider. Supply siders never complain about the deficit. They like the spending. They talked a little bit about gold, but it was always spend the money. Don't worry about the deficits, but talk a little bit about gold, and then also you can justify a hawkish foreign policy. But the hawkish foreign policy is going to collide with our downturn, and that'll be probably the best thing that'll happen. Is we'll have to start thinking perpetual war isn't a good idea. We get a little hint of what we should be doing, because Trump does say things like that. I don't want to do this, but he ends up saying, well, I need to get out of Syria, but I got to send some more people in there to protect our oil. So it's hard
That's
to figure
crazy,
that out.
yeah.
Yeah.
Ron, you've been sharing your perspectives on the economy or policy for almost generations now, many decades. What message do you have for the younger generation now who are taking up the mantle where you're leaving it off, maybe?
Well, my big theme is liberty. An individual, and try to get everybody to understand what it is and have a desire for it. And I like that issue because, it produces a free market. It produces a society where people can do what they want with their lives, their personal lives, their church life, and all these things. And everybody should be in agreement for it. So you get to earn your money. You get to spend it the way you want, not somebody else. And it should bring people together. It should bring people together that are progressive, and I think that we have too much war. If people both live right now, there's both progressives and some, conservatives who think that we should have more privacy, but both sides. Just the other day, Republicans and Democrats, renegotiated the Patriot Act and extended it, and they had to sneak that through. So I try to get people to think that, if you want a better life, you need to be in charge. But when I talk to the college kids, I said the one thing is, and because a lot of them would like it, because freedom of choice, and you get to pick everything you do, eat, drink, and all this, but you have to know that you cannot hurt other people. You can't do this, and you can't allow the government to do it either.
How can we better communicate this? Because I see you've been working on the front lines for so long, and even I've been basically doing this for 10 years now. And often I think, how can I have more of an impact? Because at Rice University here in Houston, and I read the Houston Chronicle, and I think, man, there's a lot of people still haven't gotten the message at all. It's just sometimes it can be tough.
Yeah, but I think that you're being overly critical about what you have been able to do, because nobody knows what happens. I think I could, think exactly what you said. Why am I doing this? What's happening? But then I get to thinking, I meet people all the time that have started different organizations, and spoken. Just think of what Jim Blanchard did as an individual. He should get all the credit for, shaking up this country and getting gold re-legalized again. One individual. And I think that when I go around the country, I meet people that have their own organizations. So I think philosophically there's a lot of good things going on. It's just that the mess that's in Washington is reflecting the last 30 years of official education. But today, in spite of the shortcomings of the internet, that is helpful to us. And I think there's places like the Mises Institute has educated a lot of people. And I think that they're out there, and you don't have to worry about, well, when are we going to get 51% to agree? No, we just need a few more people in leadership positions, because most people are sort of, followers, and they just follow the leaders of their lemons, both negative and positively. So what you do is important, and I think you have had influence, and you don't have to say, well, I want to see 5,000 people out there for me next week. So I don't think it works that way. But I think there's a lot of positive things going on. So, and the bottom line is, I still remain a bit, optimistic that we are making inroads, but only in the philosophic sense. But I realize what kind of problems we have to go through before we'll win that fight.
But Ron, I appreciate what you said about Jim Blanchard. Obviously, with what we're doing at Gold Newsletter, we really appreciate that. But I also have to say that not only, as Fergus mentioned, the decades that you've been working on the front lines to advance the idea of personal liberty, but I found even since your presidential campaign, I thought that was tremendously influential in convincing a lot of younger people of the libertarian views and the idea of personal liberty and how to really pursue that, and how it's different than the typical spectrum we see today of the liberal progressives on one end and conservatives Republicans on the other end. They don't really realize the third leg of the stool, as it were. And in your campaign, I think, converted literally millions of people to that school of thought. And that was just tremendously influential. And I think we still see the results of that today.
No, and I think what we're talking about is ideology is important. Ideas have consequences on it. And also that ideas can't be stopped. Governments can't stop ideas, even with all the censorship and all the things going on with controlling the internet. Ideas cannot be stopped by armies and government. They are spread. That's the way it happened 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, by word of mouth, if nothing else. But now we have a lot more opportunity. If 10, 15 years ago, you say, Ron, when you get out of college, you'll probably be able to have your own little program in a little studio, and you can reach umpteen thousand people every day, and it'll be replayed. I don't even know how the internet works in a studio, and it came along because people decided they still wanted me to be active. So I think it's out there, and I just think that, because I am very, very confident. I always recognize my shortcomings and why I might have been say something better or do something better, but I am absolutely confident that if we want to live in a better world, we have to recognize the significance of individual liberty, where our liberties come from, and not drift toward collectivism. And that's all you hear about, from our colleges. And I just did a little booklet recently, and I got into the real culprits in our universities, all this political correctness and cultural Marxism and everything. The universities are just horrible, but you can get an education otherwise too. I mean, back in the 60s, I anticipated 1971, because there were libertarians around, they were writing books about this. Harry Brown and others, they were writing about it and the way investments should go. And that really, it's always out there. And it's very, very powerful. It's when people lie, they finally get trapped. And all we're hearing now on our, regular media are just lies and lies and lies. And they are losing credibility, and they will. So we have to keep doing our best to promote the truth.
It's such an amazing world we live in today. It's easy to get pessimistic. I mean, it's a world completely turned on its head. We have negative interest rates. Who would have thought that? We have fascists running around labeled as anti-fascists. We have people parading in demonstrations using fascist tactics and proclaiming themselves anti-fascists. We have negative interest rates to a degree that's, we've never even imagined before. So it's just a world turned on its head.
It is, but we've had other periods in our history that's been pretty bad. Economic conditions were, the worst time was probably in the 1930s, and also when we were killing each other unnecessarily in the 1860s, and we killed about 700,000 or 800,000 Americans. I mean, there are times when we go through this. I think it is a real challenge. I think the founders were on the right track, and I think we should, pick up on what they gave us. But I think that we've slipped in the last 100 years. But I think we can, get enough people. That's why I like to talk to young people. Their minds are more open for this.
Before you go, I did see a book out that you're promoting, America 2020, The Survival Blueprint. Do you want to give a brief comment on what that is?
Well, this is just an analysis, of, this comes through Stansberry, and that is an analysis of the current events. And basically, the theme is probably what we touched on here, what's government doing and what people have to do, and look at the various options for trying to protect oneself. Because that's really what people end up doing when these conditions get bad, is how do you protect oneself? And that's a whole story in itself. The first thing, I think, is education, then finding friends that you can depend on, and I think a better day will come.
Ron Paul, thank you for giving us your time. His website is ronpaulinstitute.org. Thanks again, and it's a privilege to have you on, and a former guest at the New Orleans Investment Conference as well. Brian, any final words?
Just that it's been a great honor, Ron, to have you on the show. You've been such an icon, libertarian thought for so many years in advancing the cause, and we really appreciate your time today.
Very good. Great being with you.
Cheers.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Take care.